Thank you. It's very good to see so many dear friends here, and I'm honored. And particularly honored to do this particular talk in honor of Lou Kahn, who was extraordinary and it had extraordinary influence on, I'm sure, all of us, or most of us. I would also say, and am I speaking loudly enough? You know, my father, you can get me louder back there, right? Okay. My father spoke very loudly and therefore have a difficulty doing that. It's worth saying I'm also tickled to see so many of my cohorts from our practice and my partners. You know, there are 12 of us now. We're scattered throughout the country, and we are all friends. And we work in harness in the theory that 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 equals about 30. So one can look at someone like me and see an individual, but the truth is that we do this together. And there are many key projects that we do, extraordinary number, that I've had very little to do with, or nothing to do with. And there are others that I have a lot to do with. Now tonight, I will show you ones that I have had to do with a few exceptions, ones that I particularly love, such as Bernie's Bell, or the barn at Falling Water that was Roxanne Scherbeck's project. I may have had a tiny influence on these, but it's almost impossible to spot. So it's a worthy issue for us all that we are in I guess it's a profession, but a hobby, as Dick Powell would have said, my original partner, that truly thrives on the interaction of all of us with our clients, with our consultants, in many cases, amazing people, and among ourselves. So I don't mean to dwell on that more, but it's worth saying, because often people can be seen as individuals when I believe that what we all do is much more interactive than that. And we gain greatly from that interaction. So, people. There was a little job we did in Little Compton years ago. That was in the barn. We're finally going to renovate this barn into a summer living room. But we've done a whole series of it. But the point is, it is about people. And it sounds corny, but man, any architect who forgets that is probably giving away too much of, just not able to do what I think ideally can and should be done. Next. I'll go back for just a moment. I'm going to pick up the speed, by the way, because I'm worried. I have this reputation of giving very long talks. And Bernie's always kidding me about it. It kids me about the one in Philly when I fainted in the middle. But I finished it. Turned out I had the flu. You will see me swiffen up, and if you want me to slow down, tell me, but I don't think you will. I went to Rensselear, as we said earlier, but I thought this particular tool from my sophomore year in the woodshop is useful because it tells you a bit about my and our beliefs. And that is, it's rooted in its circumstance. It can be used in many ways by children in the sand. It's not just one thing. It was made out of wood in the woodshop, and it tells you about wood. If you wish to know about it, you can feel it. You can see it. You can feel it in the grain. You can feel it in the grain where the circular parts are done on the lathe, the flat parts are done in a sander, the curved parts were done on a bandsaw. And therefore, it's telling you of its making It's somewhat of its origin, and it is somewhat enabling in what it means for the user. Now, the user can either recognize this or not, but it makes a much richer object. If we could do buildings and places that had this level on the large scale of sort of connection to the web of circumstance, we would be doing a great thing within our society. I went to Cranbrook. It was a great liberation almost. You know, Eliel was gone, but his buildings were there. I was told later when I saw Ralph Rapson out in Minnesota that when they were there, they disliked his buildings because they weren't white and modern. Obviously, they were great and wonderful places to be, and it was so great to see how these were shaped by people that had their roots a little bit earlier than modernism and became modernists. But also they were humane. They were a matter of making places. For instance, when you walk through that gate, you could hear that fountain in the distance, and it unified that space that it was in. And Cranbrook was a place of going from place to place, court to court, hearing those fountains, moving from one sense to another. They were not heavily intellectual, obviously heavily intellectual. They were very much rooted there, and they were very much just wonderful places and great in one's. They've been a touchstone for me all the way through my life. And we had the freedom there to do pretty well what we wanted. As long as, you know, they thought in the end you were worth a degree, they'd give it to you. And so, yeah, it was good. These were I think I did about 30 exercises, working backwards and forwards. You can see that there was a kind of interest in Kahn, but not literal, of serve and serving, of exposing things. I remember going down to, but it's not literal, because I was always interested too in what Paul Goldberger said, the romantic aspects of architecture. And I hate that word, romantic, but it's true. That in the issues of variation and how you could tell about things and not, how you could be rather selective, how you could reveal, how you could deal with people's perceptions and emotions. Next. And I was interested, there's a little sketch at the top, which is still a great favorite. Bernie and I talked to Chad today, and we were talking about sketches and drawings with the students. That's one of my favorites. You know, when I was in high school, we spelunked. And crawling in caves is very useful for a budding architect, because you're in an environment that's not man-made. It's not totally random, but it's more random than most places that we would be. You learn about titillation. You learn about revealing and not revealing. You learn about so many aspects of discovering the nature of a place. And that was amazing. And so, whether that is natural or man-made, and I never felt I had to decide, but you would not see the sea from that entrance. You would be moved through that progression, and there'd be light sources and air, exhausting up through those tubes to the surface. And you'd finally get to that place where you could, before you even saw the sea, you would hear the waves, because the sound of the waves would be hitting that ceiling and focusing right down on the entrance to that space, and you'd be out in that world. Now, that's a matter of getting from here to there. In my life, so far, that has cropped up one way or the other in many things. This issue of getting from here to there and how you reveal things. In our lives, I should say, for practice and my cohorts my very dear cohorts. And you get into the issue that another joint from Cranbrook. I was thinking about an underground building here, and these are the parts that grabbed light and air, and that you would see but not quite read the whole building. I was very interested in what you reveal and what you don't. Next. And then in our practice that Dick Powell and I started, Dick was 9 years older. Some of you may have known Dick. We did this little house, my mom and dad. And it was in the early 70s. And it was a second house. And so you know all the horror stories about parents working for your parents. They can be the most wonderful parents, but they're not necessarily very good clients because they're too directive and too overbearing. Well, my mom and dad were very good clients, and I did we did, Dick and I, two very good houses for them. They were both in the New York Times. This was on the cover. That is one of the keys to our practice, I think, thriving over the years. Because we had started with those, I think we got Gates because of this. I mean, at least we're on a short list, which is hard to believe. And we once got, Frank remembers, a city planning project in Patterson because we'd done this house. Hard to believe, you know, but I think it says something about people's emotions beyond the intellectual issues, which are there. That when things resonate effectively with great truth, for lack of a better word. It's not the right word, but we'll use it anyway. It is a great satisfaction. This is the first of the houses that we did that I felt did not seem to try too hard. And the key word is seem, because you work very hard not to seem to try too hard, like a great athlete. And this is an example of that, I think. That's my view. And so you approach this house. This is all about getting from here to there, too. Speaking of that issue, you approach through the dark forest. You get to a flat that is really probably a log loading platform much earlier in the century. And then you spring between the last of those evergreen trees toward the sunny deciduous forest. So it's in the potent position. You're getting from here to there. I won't go through all the details of that journey, but it's very interesting. And it has a lot to do with left and right, which is not the same in our culture, by the way. You tend to slide to the right, I believe. You tend to see differently one way or the other. And I think architects aren't talking about that now. It's too damn bad. The old timers knew a lot more about this than we do. And it was nice to make something a bit of a chameleon in a time when people were doing white modernism or brown modernism, to make a chameleon that had a shed roof that reached up for sun, that in the morning, and which was all about how you do things gracefully. Next. It's still icon in a funny way. I mean, it's funny because then you wonder, well, maybe I peaked. Oh, maybe so. You'd wish to do everything with grace, right? I'm not sure it works that way. But it really also, I think, I don't mean to overstate this, but it was getting at issues like sun and ventilation and all of that as well. And having a very graceful touch on the land. This sort of, the light in here sort of washes out under the building, but the land rises up right through under that building. So it has a graceful touch. When James Timberlake wrote the thing or presented to the board at the AIA, the final presentation, which we're not allowed to do, he did an extraordinarily good job. He pointed out that if you took away the building, it has a very gentle touch on the land. That's a monster deal, still. So that was early 70s. Paul Goldberger wrote about that. I don't know if you spotted the fact that in the New Yorker that's out today or yesterday, Goldberger wrote a little thing in there again. Next. And so, you know, one of my other heroes was Joe Eschrich. I didn't know him then. We later became friends before he died. But I thought he did a string of buildings at one point in his career particularly. He was always socially minded, which was a big deal. And I think it had particularly to do with Northern California, you know, that set of interests in the way you do things for people. I don't know that, you know, you could say it was in the Northeast, but I don't think to the level that Eschrich and those guys were doing it. And it came out of Worcester, I think. It started there somehow. And he did a few buildings, not all of them, that seemed not to try too hard. And this facade, which is hard to see, at least for me at this angle, because I'm seeing a reflection of the lights, doesn't seem to try too hard. And by the way, if you look in the window, my mom is there because she loved the sun. And I'd figured out my mom. I think you can't change people, but you can enable them. And I think I enabled my mom, as I think we all did, and my dad. But my mom loved the sun, and I think we had her figured out to within 6 inches in the kitchen. So. And lastly, this boulder could have been moved. The building could have been moved, but we didn't. And we made an accommodation. My point is that accommodations, rather than seeing everything as conflict or seeing things as compromise, or seeing one-liners of thoughts, which modernism is very fond of, it is useful to think about making accommodations and getting more strength and power from that. And that's why we carved over that boulder. Next. And of course, Frank had a lot to do with this, Frank. I think we were in this together, but you had a lot to do with this one. At Shelley Ridge here in Philadelphia. Got an honor award. It was very early passive solar building. Through a good deal of homework with our very good engineering friends, Bert Hill, we looked at the whole issue of daylighting, which turned out to be a big deal. It also said that trom walls should be rather thin if they're daytime buildings as opposed to nighttime, because you want the heat to get through soon enough, otherwise you're just heating it up overnight when it's no longer in use. So, but it was a place for people, big deal. And it made double and triple use of things, which is another thing about if we were wishing to think about a kind of sustainable world, we better start making places that do more than one thing. They can be used in more than one way. For instance, that stage is also a hearth. It's also seating, depending on how people are using that space. The Girl Scouts, I think, are probably still making a good deal of money from renting this out. I know they used to, and I'm sure they still do. Next. And then Jim Cutler did Gates. We won that competition. It was a design competition in the end, and we won. And that's how we ended up in Seattle, by the way, in that office. So I'm leaping forward in time a bit, just to save time. That warehouse was where all the timber, much of the timber came from. They were tearing it down. Gates agreed we would recycle all of that material, and that's how we made all of this timber, for instance, in the guest house and in the main house, came from recycling timber that otherwise would have been shoring along highways. That's where most of that was going at the time. Next. And we made an underground parking garage. I was thinking, I know that, you know, it's not Lou Kahn, but I was thinking, and of course, Jim came out of Penn, you remember, and he was one of Kahn's students for a year before Kahn died. Making places is a kind of big deal. And we made an underground parking garage for all Bill's guests, or many of them, not all, with a cistern underneath. and we planted a forest on top that is, so the building you don't notice. It's not a real building in the normal sense. And it was terrifically satisfying. And you will find that there's some two things. There's some little details, if you go to the stair up to the right in the back, that are pulled from Leverance's flower stall in Malmo. Any of you know that building, you know what I mean. It's the way the joints were handled. They were out rather than in, right? That's where they came from, and I did it quite purposely, because he's a favorite. I love Leverance, yeah. So, but also I would say that the lower part of the structure is board formed from the leavings from all of the mill work on to recycle the wood. A worthy idea. But the top layer is plywood, because we did it as if it was a second bit of history. We were inventing history. First time we dealt with that issue of making false histories. Of course, architects have been making false histories forever, I mean, some because they would take an earlier model and reapply it. In this case, we played the game a little differently. And so the section you see tilts up, because the engineers said, you only want about 4 feet of earth on the building. This is earthquake country, and it's a lot of weight up there to shift around in an earthquake. And so that upper roof reads like it got added later when you're in there. Now those issues have cropped up on occasion in our work. Not always, because I think it can be nervous-making. But it is a worthy interest. Next. This house, the guest house, we did 2 things in the beginning, the garage and the guest house. The guest house is all about getting from here to there. Roger Clark, in his book on precedence, points out in diagrams, I don't know if you ever noted that there's similarity between that and my mom and dad's house. Although the materials and the structuring is radically different, the spatial qualities are somewhat similar in intention. Next. And we did, many of these were underground. That building was with earth on the roof. It was a green roof. The pool is another one. But you see, Bill is a terrible driver. And we were worried about Bill coming down the driveway, making the turn, and and flying right over the top of the pool roof. And so, you never go over the pool exactly. You can see the section. But we could imagine this. I mean, he'd do it. And so we made a pile of logs there, loose logs, because, in the Northwest you see those piles of logs everywhere. They're floating around. Well, until the owl came along. The owl issue, I don't think there's many floating now. And so that back corner has more earth in the logs. Therefore, the columns you see in the corner are shifting in onto those loads. What pleasure to be able to see that connection and not have to falsify it. It was good, because that space is nicer for those timbers starting to twist in. You're not sure why, you would probably never figure it out, but it's because the loads got much heavier at that point on the roof. And you do have this space looking out to the lake. And here you're looking back at that space. Could you go back on that one, Tom? I just point out leverance. Do you spot leverance here? You notice that the door and the mullions do not hit, if the mullions, those wood mullions, hit the stone, they would denigrate the stone. I mean, it's not a nice thing to do. And of course, Leverance gave us this great example of a church in southern Sweden where he didn't cut any bricks. And he didn't jam, he did, I'm sure, joints that leaked. But in this case, we didn't, because we were inside. So those skins moved by, and we made this wood a kind of veil around the inside of that space. But if you look at the top and look at the bottom, you see stone. And of course, there's no stone behind the rest, but it reads as a stone room with a veil of wood. That's acoustic, of course. So that's probably worth noting, worth noticing as architects. Next. We made this pond. It's from water, mostly from water from the foundations, because it's a glacial area, and there's a lot of water coming through those lenses. And so we said to Bill, we think the salmon will come back and the trout, they'll spawn here. And he said, if they do, we'll do it. So we did it, and he called up the day they came. So that was great. And of course, you're making green roofs. You don't think about Bill Gates this way. I mean, until more recently, as he and Melinda have had the foundation, and his dad, great. See, it is possible. It's always the damn thing for us architects. Someone says, well, you can't do that. Yes, you can. So, you don't think about Gates this way as a green guy, but he went along here, and he actually was supportive. He was on the side of the angels, even if he made a monster house. Next. At the same time, we were doing this house near Camp David in the Catoctus for a publisher. And modernism has hardly ever done a really good rustic building, in my view. The only one that I think is a really terrific building is Alto's Villa Maria. However, that is really more of I think, and I love the building, international style building with a rustic overlay. And it's not quite a rustic building. So we set out here to make rustic modernism. I don't know that you ever knew that. And you enter this sort of space, again, getting from here to there. You enter that space, you're not sure what's on the other side, then you mark the entrance, you go through, and you find out. And it's almost, I think it's almost henge-like. It's not a henge in shape, but emotionally it's like a henge, at least some of the little henges that I've seen in England. Next. Oh, excuse me, Tom, back. This is one of the projects I'm going to dwell on a little. The framing. You notice how the rhythms dance a bit. There are splices. There are double members where we were picking up horizontal stresses back to particular columns and that. So in a way, it's like a score. Like, I think it's a music score, but of course I'm not musical, so I can do that. It tells you about itself. Now, you may not be interested in that, but the patterns are much more, as a visitor, you guys would be interested, but many people would not, most would not, or would not notice. But the richness is there because there's a connection between how it shifts and dances and what it does and what it is. Again, it's that interest that I pointed out before. Next. Yep. There you can see a little bit of it. You see there's a double member all of a sudden? Well, that's because of that column up on the right that's leaning in and picking up some sideways structural forces. So that's a worthy thing, right? And yet those things gave this building much more richness than if we had figured out how to bury some steel and do this and do that and make it all disappear. And yet you come through that door and that is the view. So you find you're in the treetops and you're hearing a stream at the bottom. I don't know in that plan sketch if you spotted the stream and the sun on that side. So you're looking at a very bright forest. You're hearing the stream. You had not been aware of those till you got to that door and entered the vestibule and reached the stair leading down to this space. And of course, we love to do interiors when people allow us to, and here we did. And it's a lot of modern antiques or modern redos of great modern pieces, and real, quite real twig antiques, and then some that we designed and had built. Next. I just want to point this out about the pool. As two things. One, as a child, I swam in quarries. You know, they're wonderful and very mysterious. This is a kind of quarry pool. Because we had a hillside, after all, we had to deal with it anyway, so it was an opportunity then to think about it that way. But beyond that, you want to shut off the rest of the house from the moisture of the pool. How do you do a door? How would you denigrate those frigging logs by making funny jams? So we didn't. Instead, there's a very nice little bit of detailing in this double door thickness of galvanized door so that it cushions against the shapes of the logs and stones. And this morning, Bernie, when we were talking to the CHAD students, I thought that was a good example. We didn't use that, but there's a good example of a little sketch that said, look, we can do this, and that's all you require. You don't have to do it on the computer. As a matter of fact, it'd be a bummer to do it on the computer. You just say, look, we've got to match that shape. And as a matter of fact, you don't do working drawings that are perfect there. You say to the crafts guys, well, match these shapes. This is how you do it. Next. And so that west elevation tells you a good deal about the nature of how this building is made. And again, you can see the roots in all the things I've pointed to before. Well, I leap forward again to Trinity. And I have very few university buildings, only a few slides of this. But just point out that the master plan said this would be a 3-story building at the edge of that entry court green. And instead, because you have the Gothic chapel right next to that site, just to the side, right over here, right there. And so we made a 1-story building with 2 stories down the slope. And then we structured it. And you can just imagine what was in my mind about older buildings and some 1 or 2 modernists, we won't name who this time, to begin to structure that carefully. And you notice the detailing. Weren't worried about using these sort of looking at the Gothic detailing and then shifting to modernism, but beginning to fiddle with the edges of those stone piers. Next. I want to leap now to Seattle and the City Hall. It's a place for people. It's a very steep site. The sun shifts from east to west as it goes down over the Sound and the Olympic Mountains in the distance. And therefore, the space is animated by its light. We had an extraordinary landscape architect that we made sure got hired by the city, Catherine Gustafson. And she said, you know, we had, 65 feet just on that part of the site, I think, as I recall. And she said, you don't want stairs steeper than Versailles. Well, guess what? The stairs run into the building. They have to go inside. They have to run halfway through City Hall to make it work. That was an extraordinary opportunity. As soon as she said that, I thought about that for 2 minutes and said, okay, that's great. And so you've connected the site and the building in a much more powerful way. It's much more, I think, visceral. It's a good word. As it threads through from NBBJ's Justice Center up above and police into our building, it's a water trough, through You hear it as it moves through. Obviously, what we really did, we start and stop water, but it reads like it's all one. And down off the edge of the site. We made places for people. The amazing thing about the Design Commission at that time in Seattle, they said, well, we have to make good places for protests. That's pretty good. And so we did. But we really, it's for people to gather. That's the point. The places we admire in Europe or elsewhere have, in earlier times here, had great places that people cared to be in. We now do those sometimes. And so we made ledges so people could overlook this. We made places for 2 people or 1 person or for 300. We have places for farmers markets, all of that. It's all here. And I think that was a very enlightened point of view on their part. And of course, we were, right on with that one. And you can see how we're shading. We're somewhat dematerializing the building. We're lightening the building. When you saw that little sketch section of mine in the last slide, I was thinking about these landforms, and how you make this transition almost like landforms. And here we have the steps to council chambers up above. Very, a powerful element in that lobby that we saw in those earlier slide. And next. But it also is a double stair, again, getting double use. It's a place for people to sit. So there are performances in here. People do gather, or sometimes just hang out on those steps. And so we made a much stronger step element that was also a place for people to use in more than one way. I would argue, if we can do all things that can be used in more than one way, or many things, we would be just making so much richer places for people and much more sensible from an economic point of view. And we did the chamber, the council chamber, so that it was not hierarchical. We made it sideways. Rather we could have, the sea is to that direction in that plan, out that way to the west. And this is a high window bringing light in the morning. And we could have turned it so it was much more a matter of sort of, you there, we here. Instead, we stretched the people around that chamber and made it more communal, which seemed it was exactly what they wanted once we got into it. Next. And there is a thought about the bridge. Jamie Carpenter did that great glass pedestrian bridge through the lobby, and you can look at it in the book. I didn't include it because it had too many slides. Next. About that time, we were also doing this little house, just 2 slides. It's about the pool. Our client has to swim every day because she had had cancer and she had to swim every day. And I knew that as soon as we started chatting, the first day, I did a sketch. And was determined to make a magical experience for her that was really, again, to use this term, visceral. And so we made that pool. And you can see how we did it. You can see Cranbrook actually affected me in an odd way, because Eliel Saarinen had done some forced perspectives in hallways and corridors. Stone, passageways to the building, or brick passageways. You notice the columns spacing keeps getting tighter as you go down the pool, so it's a false perspective. And it's magical. Next. And there's a little sketch of it. That's sort of the dream. But it is dreamlike. Now it's been sold to another client, another person, and she's an architect and her father's an architect from Canada. And so it'll be in good hands. Well, you know, we've done more recently again, coming up in time, but a little more frantic about it. The Peak up at Dingman's Ferry, up the Delaware. Very tight budget. You enter through that wall of tires that they collected, and we got some fellows from Vancouver called Moo Roof to put it together. They were doing roofs. We thought, well, we can do walls. And so you you use a saw on the tires and make them into tiles. That's what we did. Next. And then you enter this great pavilion that faces the sun, that shields from the winter winds, catches the other breezes, and that is designed to cut out the summer sun and to bring the winter sun all the way back through the space and heat up that floor. The children operate it, much like Shelley Ridge and what Frank and I did there. And that is a ventilating shed. And it's a great pleasure. And it's done for extraordinarily tight budget and very satisfying. And of course, a low fee. Next. I thought, while we're chatting mostly about things that I have been particularly involved with, it is really worth seeing Laurie Olin and Bernie's master plan for the Bell. And you know how the Bell building is again getting from here to there, and to the point where it twists and looks right where the Bell came from. Through that, and I love, this is one of my favorite sketches of Bernie's diagrams, of people can choose to move quickly or they can meander. And this is where they end up. So it is again that business of thinking about people and how they move and how they react. Now, am I loud enough now? I may have started to taper down a little. Next. And we're doing then the Ballard in Seattle. And here, we're making a great, wonderful porch for the community. It's very community-minded place, but you know in the winter it gets a little wet and damp there, so it's great to have that shelter. It's only a block from the center of the town of Ballard, which is part of Seattle. It is the busiest branch library in Seattle. And it has maritime roots and Scandinavian roots. They were Swedes and Norwegians originally in that part of town. And they were sailors. And of course now, you know, we have much broader maritime activity. But you can see how we were thinking about that when we made these little kind of bars in the building that look a bit like containers. And you can see how we put that building together under a green roof. At the time, I think it may have been the largest green roof in the Northwest, not anymore, but it was then. The multi-purpose room just where it should be. You know, if you get it just positioned right, you can get in from the outside and use it at night. And you can, if you do the baths right, the baths can still be in use and keep the rest of the library shut down. So that's how you make it really work. And it's a daylighting issue. In the Northwest, even when it's cloudy, it's misty cloudy, mostly. And it's still fairly bright, and it can be glary. So if you have large glass areas, you want to begin to mute the brightness, which we've done here, because that's looking to the north. our partner, Robert Miller, designed these tables, not the Eames chairs, but the tables, and they're made without connections, out of pieces of plywood, and they're just with a rubber mallet pushed together. So Scandinavian library people have come over to look at them, and which is very nice from our point of view. Next. And the roof. Robert also then did this terrific periscope. See these slots between the wood that go all the way around that element. So no sign. The kids find this, and they look through, and they're looking out across the roof. Because to do it, because there are no books about this that we know of, Robert laid it out on the floor of the office, and we lay down on the floor and looked through it until it was just right. Next. Almost didn't put this in, and then decided to do it quickly. This business of doing modest housing is a very large interest, I'm sure, on most of our parts. And here in Seattle, we've done 3 units that are up to within an inch of where they could be on setbacks and on height, and including saddlebags for windows. There's a clause in there that lets you make bay windows. So we made bay windows. You can see how they bump out here and there. You can see them in that little elevation. And we did it all in a hardy panel. Next. You see that little bay up at the top there to the right? That's a bay window, therefore it can be bumped out. And there's a little court in the middle, and we've got either 3 units or 2 units, depending on if you open a door or close the door. And I would love to do more of this. Now, it's hard to make the numbers work again, but if we can do enough things that are making money, we certainly intend to do more sort of thoughtful, sort of infill housing of this sort. And at this point, we're not seeing in the east so much, but certainly in the northwest, we're seeing this opportunity. Furniture, simple, again, we designed. But you notice the window mullions are extremely simple. All we've done is clipped the metal system to the outside of the studs. And so you read the body of the building, and where you have a window wall. It's extremely simple and economical. Next. Now, while we're doing that, just one slide. This is the barn that we restored and reused at Falling Water. This was Roxanne's project. And it's just a wonderful space. I'm going to give a lecture there in, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. I think that's what it is. And there was a bank barn and a milking barn. So the milking barn is newer. There's the Kaufman family, and that is now a little presentation space. I think that's where I'll be talking. And then this is multi-use. Thanks. So, Steve Jobs. Sally and I think we did a tiny job in Pittsburgh for Steve that I think I met him once and for like 10 seconds. And we were doing, for Next, his company before he came back to Apple. And it was a marketing space. But when we were working away out there and in the Northwest and in the East, they called up and asked us if we do Pixar. Went down for Steve. I wore a tie, and Steve laughed. So I've never worn a tie since with Steve, never. But he asked us to do Pixar. Pixar is, we thought of it, and Steve thought of it as a loft building. There's a great gathering space in the middle, which you see here. You could imagine it having a pre-existence, but it didn't. We used steel, by the way, that was not painted. We put clear coatings on it, so it's slightly darkened, but it's really much better than steel. But you couldn't use it on the outside, so we have a glass and brick skin on the outside. But we saw this as a building that Pixar and its animators could inhabit. I mean, I went there one day and I thought, my God, I'm the oldest person in the building. So I said this to Steve, and he said, yeah, I'm beginning to feel that way too, and of course he's not as old as I am. So, next. You can imagine us really looking at all these details. Again, it's in the book. There's a page or two of photos of our little mock-ups, of model mock-ups of the steel framing for a lot of these things, because we had to make it all work, and the bones all showed. But we made these spaces for the animators, and that's one of the tamer spaces. They just didn't let us photograph the others, because they have so much proprietary stuff on the walls. And there's that gathering space in the middle, and it really does work. And then Steve asked us to get into the Apple stores. We did some one-story shopping center things for a bit and started pushing to get rid of the black, do the stainless. That took a while. Changed some of the systems. And we got then to the first two-story stores. This one in Soho and the one at the Grove in LA. And so the challenge here, it was wonderful to be inside of a little historic building. And we're about, by the way, to renovate this, not so it would be so noticeable, but we've gotten the space behind the lower floor, which is a post office. So now we can get a bigger body, which we really need because the Apple stores have to be larger and larger. There have been articles in the New York Times about this, that it is a kind of village center or village community thing. People meet here. It's not quite like just a store. And that's one of the really interesting things about Apple. How do you entice people? Back to my cave crawling. How do you entice people up? It's a little hard in retail. You could just put a regular stair, but it wouldn't do as good a job. So that was the first job where we used glass. And you levitate almost. You feel like you're levitating as you move up. And of course, then we did Fifth Avenue. That had always been a failure. I think you saw Huxtable's comment on it at one point. It had always been a failure. And Apple, and what we've done with Apple here, has changed all of that. And what a pleasure to be able to just get the right thing to change a place. That is you can imagine the pleasure of doing that. And of course you need great engineers to do this kind of glass. No steel structure, that's all glass. And now we could do it with many less pieces. There's this discussion about changing it and to upgrade it. I think I'm against that. I prefer to keep it historic until we can take the single glazing and make it thermal in some fashion without mullions, which we can't quite do and make it structural at this point. But we'll get there. And now that we're doing these buildings in China, I think the Chinese are going to come right along with their technology, and this is European technology, and British engineers. And I think we'll get there. We'll be able to make these be as pure as Steve desires and as we desire, and much more thermally operative. Now, in this case, of course, it's a small window on a big space. So, you could easily justify it in that regard. But still, there is that issue that we are driving hard on, and sooner or later we're going to solve. Next. How do you entice people down? Boy, is that tougher than enticing them up. And you notice the elevator in the middle. The earliest sketches, if you look in the book, there's no elevator in the middle. And then we put it in the middle. We had it buried back in the, Ed Stone's old building. And we finally put it here, and it's kind of a beam-me-up solution. Any of you have been there, it's open 24 hours a day. So that's good. These spaces, like this one, are generating more income per square foot than any other retail in the world, other than, I'm imagining there's some diamond merchant somewhere in a closet. But other than that, Apple is generating more dollars per square foot than any other retail. At least that's what Apple tells us. Now, that's Apple's products. I don't say it's a building. The buildings enable Apple in a way. But Apple's a great client, and Steve has been terrific. Imagine if someone's screwing around with your building, which people do to all of us. You say, Steve's going to do them. And they straighten up, because he's not going to put up with it. It's wonderful to have a client like that. Although I feel a little, we've become good friends, but I feel, as Sally knows, a little like going in the closet or into the cage with the tiger. But it usually works out. It always works out. But you still have that little twinge in your gut. Now there's without the elevator. See the little sketch? That was earlier. That was right in the beginning when that conception was there. And of course we keep tuning the furniture. Wanted to get, they were first doing this awful stuff I hated. Corian and all, in the very earliest stores. I don't know if you remember that. But we've gotten rid of it all. It took a while. And we're refurbishing all those stores. And we're now going to something that is somewhat, for lack of a better word, forgive me for this word, timeless. That's just the way it should be. And a little chunkier than what so-called, I think somewhere Paul Goldberger or someone else called them Parsons tables. They're not. Anyone who really knows a Parsons table knows it's detailed differently. Right? But it is similar to what Plattner did after that. But they were all thinner, and this one has much more body. That gives us a chance to put a lot of electronic crap underneath that you can't see. Next. There's that elevator. That was pretty expensive elevator, by the way. There's no standard elevator like this. So you really, our teams have become quite rigorous. The team here is working on 2 Apple stores, so they're beginning to get that sense of rigor, of that particular Apple rigor from San Francisco, right? And the one on Walnut Street is going to open not too long from now. And it's a small store, but it's going to be quite good. But someone has pointed out, I know what, Ron Johnson, the head of retail, was an amazing head of retail at Apple. And he is such a pleasure, and he's so goddamn smart. And he's nice. But he's tough. It's just, how could you ask for someone better than that? And he knows what he's doing. He's the key guy at Target when they were becoming special. And then Steve was smart enough to hire him. He was smart enough to go there. And he's been a key to all of this. I don't mean at the design level, but certainly at the retail strategy level, which is a monster thing here. But I think someone pointed out that there's the littlest skyscraper in New York. So, in a way, it's true. It's the 5th most photographed building in New York now, which is ridiculous, of course. And the 28th most photographed in the world. That's even more ridiculous. Yeah, it's Apple, but it's something else too. So some of you, I'm sure, have seen the new one on Broadway just north of Lincoln Center. It's about 2 blocks north of Tully Hall. What we call it Upper West Side. And it's a great market hall. And you see the sketch. I was thinking here, and Carl Backus, our partner, one of the 2 partners in San Francisco, is at Apple every Tuesday. And he is just living Apple. And I am lucky, therefore, and this is true for many of us, to be able to go every 3rd week to the Apple meetings and spend a lot of time with Carl, and we chat in between, and that works fine. And it probably is better that way. But we made a great market room, the largest marketing room we've ever made for Apple. And I think that model we're going to see in other versions, both in the U.S. and in China, where we're doing a whole series of them, beginning to do a whole series. But I like the drawing, and in a way it goes back, reminding us a bit of the old days of pen, I think. Not the skylight, but the skylight is done with serious finesse. It was not possible if you go back and look at buildings done 20 years ago by noted architects, they could not have done that delicate a bit of engineering, I think. And that includes those little horizontals, the ones going east-west here this way. They are carrying all of the services too. Sprinklers, lighting, they've got it all. Sound. It's all tucked in there. It's a very delicate system. And you can imagine, you just don't let your engineers at it, even brilliant engineers. We are very much in the middle of this. And that's Tennessee marble, by the way. Steve picked that. I think he probably was right. I would have picked something a little tougher, but actually looking back on it, I think he was right to pick the marble. It's one of the choices we chatted with him about. Next. So, what do you do at the Tetons? This is with Ray Calabro, our youngest partner, who was not a partner then in the practice. And I'm very much involved with Ray, and Ray was very much involved. It's sort of like hand in glove. We are joined. How do you make a visitor center for the government, which is an interesting challenge. I don't mean that in a terrible way, but the government's going to be a little conservative. They're also going to worry that this is going to be better than some other park. And that is a worry. You can understand that one. So we've had that struggle a bit. However, we were able to do a very good thing. There's a book on this. I don't know if it's at the AIA bookstore, it may be, but it's in the new book as well. You enter this very calm court. That's an extraordinarily early drawing. That was right at the beginning. You come through the edge of this grove. The Snake River is out here just below at the edge of the sketch. And this is a view from probably 100 feet in from this great the Snake River. You walk through that grove and parking, and then you get to that courtyard, which, by the way, is a little different in the final solutions, but similar, and it's a golden rectangle. And Bill Gates I didn't mention his little guest house. The paving is a Fibonacci series. So those of us who went to RPI, we were hung up on those things. But it's fun to do that, I mean, the truth is, those patterns with the modular, the Greek proportioning systems, or nature are all almost identical. That is a really worthy issue if one wishes to delve into it. So it's a calm court that has many uses, and it sort of calms them down a bit. They've been on the highway, they come in, now they're there, and it's multi-use, as we see here. A little bee drawing here on the left. It's so much fun to do those things. And you see the little pattern of the golden rectangle in there? You see the little light drawing? You can just find it. Next. And from that you enter this space. And it tilts up to the mountains. It has this extraordinarily grand fireplace that's concrete and stone. We worried about it. First was stone. I was worried about not being modernist enough, and then there was a budget rumble. So we made it concrete, which is by far happier, and some stone, which is really nice. And then the donor, and we got a donor for it all. I actually did the sale on the donor. And he didn't realize it was no longer stone. So later he rumbled a little, but then he was happy after it got built. And these are great timber. All these timbers are Canadian, but they are all, I forget the particular word, but they're all sustainably grown and forested. Next. The windows tilt slightly to cut out reflections and also to aim a little more directly right at the mountains. And you see how we looked at the snow here in the court. Turned out we looked at that with a very good, and actually an acquaintance of Bernie's of mine from San Francisco, who's sort of an alpine expert. I think he does mostly forensic stuff now. architects get sued, this sort of thing. But we found that if you looked hard at the snow patterns and the wind patterns, that the code was wrong. That you still have to meet the code, I think, because a code is a code. But it would not have been sufficient for those very large loaves of snow that would develop on the roof because of the winds and so on. So we designed for his calculations with an overlay of, or you'd say for the code, but then an overlay of his calculations. But you see how that makes these tunnels around the court in the winter, and the snow sits in that recessed court and it melts. And we put snow melt under there, but it's geothermal. Next. So, this is modernism, and it's rustic, sort of, right? But it has to do with getting from here to there and dealing with people's emotions. I believe most modernism has not done that as effectively as it might. That is my own personal view. Our clients are here for this one, a Philadelphia client, but this house is on the San Juan de Fuca Strait. That view is, you see the sea down here, is that 150 feet high? Yeah. And it's a cliff. So you don't want to get too close because it may slough off. You reminded me I was too close at one point. I don't remember that. But it's a simple building. It's not a big building. And it's a lovely, I'm tickled about it. And next. You see we're using recycled barn material. And we've got it's an agrarian kind of scheme. It's got a cistern, right where the V is in the roof. And you could see the sequence moving this way and all of a sudden getting that view out to sea. That's looking right out toward China. Well, actually, I think it looks a little toward Vancouver Island, but it's so far away, you can imagine it's China. So we keep doing those little things. It's hard to make the numbers work for us, but we want so badly to do them. And we're not stopping. But the problem is, of course, to do good ones. Yeah. Whatever that means. So here's a larger one. And we're down to now the last few projects, by the way. And I bet my time isn't too terrible, actually. It's probably pretty good, actually. Close to what I said, because you remember, we started on time, but I didn't get to start at the beginning. Bernie's always kidding me about taking much too long. No, not quite like that, right, Bernie? This is south of San Francisco. It's a wonderful thing, and by the way, it's in the book. It'll also be in the New York Times, Pilatus's pieces, but electronically, because much of the Times is now shifting more and more toward the electronic world. But that means you get many more better photos, you get more writing, and you get a video on this one. So I think this comes out at the end of this month. No, and the world is shifting that way amazingly fast, as we all know, right? The Flickr, or what is it called? Twitter? No. What's that called? Huh? Twitter. Off of the article in the Inquirer, I don't know how many of you spotted just how Twittered that got. But it was thousands in Europe and elsewhere. And for architects, it's sort of like, what? What's going on? I don't know how crucial that is to our future, but I think it's probably something one shouldn't ignore. And we're lucky, in Apple you have all the Twitterers. You have many Twitterers. I know I have that wrong. I'm sorry. But, so this house will be in at the end of the month, and I'm sure she's writing a good article. And there's a very good essay in the book by Todd Williams on this house that I'm very fond of, and we are all very fond of, and I think you will be. He's a good, damn good architect, but he also writes well, and he thinks well. So you're not sure where you are here when you get to this opening on a great site, And you see these buildings sort of higgly-piggly around the space. And you see they're pretty low, most of them. To the left, they're particularly low. They're almost like corrals and fences. And you can't tell where a fence stops and a building starts. And that's quite purposeful. And that was the early sketch of that thought. Next. And then you get in close. Here are the kiddos looking out of their bedroom wing, but there's the entry in the distance. And you come through that opening, we're looking out of here, into this really wonderful, extremely delicate pavilion. Again, you need amazingly good engineers to do this. Next. This is within a mile or so of the St. Andreas Fault. This is a very delicate pavilion. And you'll see that again in the next photo or two. And yet, and it floats. Yet there are these other elements like the library, which we'll see here behind Mata's paintings. We sort of influenced the interior here, but our client got so interested in modern antiques, modernism. And he got really good at it. And so it's a matter of just reminding and nudging and saying, there's this Breuer thing that he did that I don't think anyone knows about. And it turned out that he could get it from Guggenheim's estate. And he's just gotten a bicycle, the only one in the world now that Prouvé made during the war for his own use. And it's the only one that works. And I don't know if he's going to hang it in the library, which I've suggested he do. I think he's going to start riding around on it. I believe, So, this is all Prouvé stuff and Perrion stuff and other things of this sort. But it's a pavilion next. And how do you make it so delicate as that? Well, you do what that sketch says. You put a lot of meat back in there, but then you get really fine when you get to the edges. And so it's a kind of sleight of hand. But boy, is it effective. Next. In the library, again, going back to some of your days at Penn, is a room, a serious room. And I thought of it as, have you ever met a dog you thought it was the dog of all dogs? I remember meeting one that was Australian. It was a screwy kind of looking thing. It clearly was the dog of all dogs. We wanted to make a library of all libraries, and we did. Next. And the way we'd be working, looking at getting into more and more tuning and changing the proportions and fiddling. So Dennis found this little note that I'd sent him, I think electronically probably, about shifting the fireplace height and fiddling with details. Next. And there's that space, the lower left. I have a gizmo here, don't I? Right there. But isn't that a nice plan? Cut into, I kind of like it. But it dematerializes the building to a great extent. And so it's modernism, but isn't quite the normal way of doing it. And yet, I think it has to do with how people perceive things, right? And how they move through them, how they discover them, how they remember other places where they've been, how they're comforted, all of that. And that's a Chirot desk from the 20s. Just great. And that is an astronaut's underwear. Only one we know out of captivity. No, it has all the little tubes, so for heating and cooling. You can't quite see it in that photo, but man, it's wonderful. Next. And it does come down to detailing, of course. Although, as I pointed out, Uniqlo isn't like that. It's a matter of making the big gestures and then hoping the details sort of work out with all these people working 24 hours a day. You know if you were going to screw up. But you notice this hardware, we designed that. And it's biomorphic. Grip it. And there are all those sorts. So you notice these props for the great oaks. So what a pleasure to have this to do. That book, this house is in that book, but there will be a book on this house because the client says, well, we're going to do a book. So the question is how to do the book. And I think we'll keep our hand on it, but not. Get a great designer who's Matilda from Malmo, and who did the Helvetica book for Lars Müller, right? And I think it's going to be great. And then we'll spring the photographer and she on this and see what comes out. Yeah. How do you do a pool of all pools? You notice water and that deck are right in the same plane. There's a tiny slot between, and there's, of course, that's dark. But you should make a pool if you can, if you have the means, in the case we did. In the case of Sally and my pool, much simpler, but it's pretty nice too. But it was cheap, but it's cracking. Really cheap, actually. Done by Sylvan, if you know Sylvan. But it's a very nice pool. It's really simple. But here, you hear that water flowing down through that crack. The plane of the water and the plane of the wood are right on. And then we did these little outbuildings on that site, passed them on the way in. They're very small. They were where existing buildings were, an old garage that was falling down and a little house that was falling down. And we made it into a guest house and a little office. But we were allowed to put them there right next to the creek, otherwise we would have had to be 50 feet away. But it was, it's grandfathered. Little sketch of how we got to the edge of the creek. And it's in a thicket. Sketch of sense of those window walls. So, Hawaii. This is looking from Diamond Point down on the site. So we're on a volcano, right? A dead volcano. As you know, Hawaii is a series of volcanoes. The volcanoes keep moving, so they keep giving more islands in that string. And the volcanoes are, maybe the islands are moving and the volcanoes are still, I think. In any case, here we are doing what is a gallery and a studio and a little apartment for this client who lives in this house. Any of you know what a dickey is? The houses in Hawaii that Dickey designed, architect, they're very well known. The roofs are like that, and he was doing them in the 30s. Famous Hawaiian shapes. You'd think it was maybe the natives designed them. No, it was Dickey. And so we split this. It's a benign climate. So you can walk between these, and as you see, this is strange. This isn't as flat as it looks. It bulges a little. It's a bit of a beast. And these are trays of concrete and this extension toward the sea. And we've gotten pretty good about sleight of hand. You see the office leaps across that space to the studio? Right there. There's a sketch. Next. There's our volcano. And we're looking at the sea behind us if we turn around. Next. He has it's post-World War II mostly. There are a few things like ARP that predate World War II, but mostly it's post. There's some really interesting things in his collection, like David Smith painting. You know, we all think of David Smith as something else. We're almost done, by the way. Next. There's the art. So, and we did, those are, you know, again, it's somewhat earthquakey. We did a pretty careful job, and so we have some walls that stiffen, and then we have these very slender stainless steel columns, and the concrete slabs. That's it. Next. And a section looking at that bridge. And you can see how the stair, that's a love of the tactile qualities there, right? And getting, I mean, architects love stairs, right? We all do. Next. There's our client. Looks like a slightly shorter me, actually. And I think that painting is by, is it Volkos? He was a great ceramic guy, but he was a painter before he did ceramic stuff. And that projects from his office into the gallery. And we finally, the early sketches showed a stair. And he said, no, we don't need that. And I said, oh, good, we don't need that. And so it was very pure. And this door pivots, which is a very nice door. Next. But here's the thing. When you're in that gallery, you can look up, and in the later afternoon, which you don't have a photo yet, we'll take one later this summer, at dusk, that mountain is gold. And when you turn around, you look out at the sea. And you see you're right there. And you're looking up to the mountain or out to the sea. So, it all has to do, again, with point of view, how you get to that point, how you're in the potent position, and then how you deal with it. Next. This is how we dealt with that view. Next. So, this is now coming closer to home. And I think it's the last project, I think. This is Combs Point on Seneca Lake for a wonderful client. It's in the newest Metropolis. I don't know that it's out yet. I think it's out, but I'm not sure it's arrived yet in the mail. But I don't think it has a photo of that waterfall. That's at the head of the ravine. And this is, the house is in the ravine and extends out on the delta. That ravine, when it's made, would form a delta in the lake. Next. So here you can see in this little sketch, you can see how the house potent position as far as the main living space goes is just beyond that edge, where you can also see sideways along the edge of the lake. This lake is very deep. I think it's like 1,000 feet. It's a very deep lake. It's a big glacial trough. But there's the waterfall. And it's a little bit of a higgledy-piggledy necklace that sort of parallels the stream but doesn't, and gets between the trees. And then we will someday, we now have the path to here. Someday we'll take it to here. You know that little photo of E.B. White in his tiny little studio, his little room? Is it E.B. White? I think it was. We think we'll do this tiny little room up there. I don't know what the architecture should be, but right there, and it connects by a path to here. Next. And so it's modernism, but it's softened down to sort of pretty careful cottage modernism. This is looking from the end toward the stream. The stream's right behind us. This is in the winter. Next. And again, you notice this sort of saddlebagging of these little buildings. We wish to stain them all dark green, almost black, but the client was a little uncomfortable with that. He was a great client, so we made them different, much thinner boards than on the main house. But I would have liked to have differentiated them just a little more, but we didn't really have to. It would have been more visually edgy, but actually it's just fine. the sun arcs this way from east to west. You probably noticed that on the site plan. And so you will note in the next photos that the roof here twists up to catch the sun as it comes over the ridge. And then it modifies itself as it comes forward into the main living space. And that's a really nice moment. Next. You can see that roof tilting up there and there. Next. And here's that steel beam that's coming down that hall, and see how it twists right here. And of course, another fireplace. My mother, when we did the first house for them, we made a box, to scale up the fireplace. We made a room. And my mom called it the hot box. But we've been doing hot boxes of one sort or another all through our careers, because it gives you a chance to scale up a fireplace, unless you really only have room for a little tiny thing. But to make places that are counterpoint to a space like this is just terrific. And you know where those shapes came from? I think they came from my love of Lou, but he never did one like that exactly. But you notice here, you're right to this point at the dining table, the kitchen's right here, and there you're looking sideways down the lake, which to me is almost a better view than straight out. Next. And there you can see a study of that little view positions. Next. And so in Metropolis, Alexandra Lang, I think she calls this a sort of porch-like, and I mean, the whole living room is kind of like a porched place. And our client, Wendell, and his son need a great deal of light, more than most people, physically. And this certainly provides that. And it was very much part of the original brief that we do that. Next. And last slide, there's that fireplace and there's the building. So, what we've looked at is a bit here and there of the full practice, but we've looked at things that have come out of many of us along the way. I've concentrated more on smaller building than large, as much as anything, because it's easier to talk about them and easier to get into some of the nuances and details than on some of the larger work. But I'm sure that our larger and smaller buildings influence each other. And we would hope that that continues. We certainly work to make that happen. But if we continue to be blessed as we have been, I think Bernie, you and Frank, and Randy, we're in for a good ride. So thank you so much. I hope it was okay.
Absolutely delightful.
Oh, good. Yes. I have forgotten. I will answer questions. I was reminded I should answer questions, and I love to answer questions. So, go at it.
Can we get the house lights up? Now that we've got
And is the sound working? Oh, it is now.
Okay.
Good.
There is a microphone that's located in the aisle on that side for those who would like to ask some questions.
Hey, Bernie, that timing wasn't bad considering we started late, right?
Any questions? Comments? Huh?
I remember one of the people here asked me a question earlier that I didn't answer. It was about the effect of religion in our buildings. So I thought, I didn't have to think too much about that. I would say this, that I was raised in a very religious family. I would not claim to be particularly religious now in the formal sense at all. But I believe that upbringing caused me, one, to feel a good deal of guilt, which is something that I've been running from all my life. Architecture is a hell of a way to do that. But beyond that, to be very more positive and not joking, I think that it caused me from the beginning to think about what was always the right thing to do. I don't mean by that, having a rigid view about morality, but I do mean knowing that one better think about it a good deal. And we were talking about that today for a moment, Bernie, over at Chad. I think that architecture could be considered somewhat a little rudderless today, to some extent. I'm not making a big deal of this, but I think it is less ruddered, has less direction than when we started. There was then more belief. That's why I love people like Joe Esherick, actually, or Lou Kahn, because they did have belief. I mean, they believed in certain things, and guys like Esherick were quite socially minded about that. I mean that in the best sense. And I think having a good dose, in my case, of Lutheranism, German Lutheranism, which is fairly strict. I should point out, by the way, in Lutheran Procure School, I got a D in art because I refused to do what they told me to. And my father had showed me how to do perspectives. I don't mean how to set them up, just how to think that way. We were talking about that this morning. And so I refused to do flat drawings. And so they gave me a D. And fortunately, my parents, who were pretty directive, they laughed. Or they didn't, maybe they didn't laugh, but let's put it this way, they didn't get upset. So religion, I know one of you wanted me to answer that question, and I've just answered it. I think that that kind of background is not terribly, is useful and very helpful because, and for me, although I haven't carried all of the details with me, because it has caused me and us to wonder often about the right thing. And that doesn't mean just big deal things, it means little things. And Frank, you share that feeling in your way. I mean, you were a Quaker, among other things. And so there are these interests in the society. At least that's how I view you, Frank, which could be wrong.
If you permit me a follow-up question to the initial question that I asked you before. Peter, thank you. Please, thank you. I wish to ask you about a realm.
About what?
About a realm. As in realm.
I'm sorry, yes.
Realm.
I see my parents were hard of hearing. I'm working on that.
Yeah, you used the word realm, so I took note of it.
R-E-L-M.
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
A realm indicated by the words reverence, religion, reliance, rigor, responsibility, and conscientiousness.
And emotion.
Yes. And
because,
how?
Our original partner, Dick, did I say this already? He thought he was the most rational guy in the world. And he was a terrific partner, but he wasn't the most rational guy because he believed he was. And I believe, and I think much of what we all deal with, I don't mean that in a horrible criticism, much of what we all deal with in the architectural world and the world any of us are in is at the emotional level has to do with people's feelings, how they perceive things, how they remember things, and how they basically feel in many ways. And it's very subtle, we're all a bit different, but there it is. And so I would add that to your list.
Yes.
And I would add one more thing, and that's escape. I have been all my life been escaping in one way or the other. I will say that, and maybe a lot of us do. That's why we love to do what we do. We are escaping. That's why we're children.
And how is this religion relevant?
I'm sorry.
How is this religion relevant
I think
to room making, to the making of rooms?
I don't care to make rules, but I do care to think a lot and take responsibility for what is the right thing to do. And I know that, and that can be it's a terribly subjective thing in my view. And you could make rules that I'd probably agree to mostly, but I'm not sure I'm for rules. I'm for people caring a lot and caring about those issues and understanding what the implications of what they're doing are or could be. That is a big deal. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Presentation.
Is this a medal?
Oh,
Oh,
it's a medal.
I can't find one of my medals. This is going to be great at the convention.
There you go. On behalf of the entire membership of the Philadelphia AIA, this is a medal commemorating your presence here tonight and your continuing the tradition and the legacy of Lou Kahn, and for all of your wonderful work and support of the profession that we all dearly love. So thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you. I will wear this at the gold medal ceremony, along with my favorite medal, which happens to be the Committee on Design, which is the Maze at Chartres. And any of you know that medal, boy, it is a beauty. And of course, the FAIA thing, right, and all of that burning. I don't know where the silver medal is from the state. I can't find it. Don't say this too loud.
Thanks very much, Peter Bohlin. Thanks to everyone for coming out tonight, and good night, Philadelphia.